salesman Howard Kitaoka in row 5. He makes this trip often. When you've seen the view 100 times, 35 minutes is precious time to catch up on paperwork. The flight's so short that the attendants serve drinks while they're still climbing. They can move around, but the passengers are still strapped in. It's 1:45, 20 minutes into the flight. The aircraft is at cruising height.
Honolulu to center, Aloha 243, leveling off at 240.
The crew relax.
See, where's that National Weather Service weather station out here? Is that in the old tower?
In perfect flying weather, everything is following the familiar pattern.
Do they? We've lost pressure!
I saw a brilliant flash of light and boom.
Everything was being sucked out of the plane.
Here's what happened. An explosive decompression has torn away 35 square meters of the fuselage.
We were in a tremendous gust of wind. The wind gust was unbelievable.
A mass of things just went whoosh out the plane. Hair was up here. Everybody was in their seat except the stewardesses. I saw the stewardess get smashed down in the aisle. I could see her hair blowing and I could see blood, but that's all I could see of her.
Jane Sato Tomita has been struck by debris at row 2. Michelle Honda has been thrown to the floor at row 15. There's no sign at all of C.B. Lansing. 30 seconds have now passed since the explosion. The wind noise makes it impossible for the flight crew to communicate. Now, for the first time, they gain a sense of what's happened. Visible over a mound of tangled debris, there's blue sky, where the airplane roof used to be. The first 5 rows are now completely exposed to the sky on both sides of the plane. The initial threat of being sucked out is past, since the airplane is now completely depressurized, but passengers are still in danger.
My seatmate was dropping out outside the aircraft because at that point it was just the floor and no walls or seating. And so I grabbed him.
The cold and oxygen deprivation are both potentially deadly.
Just imagine the scene up there. The top of the airplane broken off. The passengers don't have any ability to get supplemental oxygen because the critical tubing that feeds that oxygen is now gone. And at 24,000 feet, with very little to breathe up there, the passengers become incapacitated. That's called hypoxia. If you stay up at that altitude for any prolonged period of time, you become more and more physically disabled. With the top of the airplane gone, you now have 300-mile-an-hour winds blowing into that cabin. That's 3 times hurricane-force winds. Those people were dressed for Hawaii in the springtime, not minus 50-degree temperatures. Any period of time at 24,000 feet, and those people will die.
How sure are we? High above the Pacific Ocean, an extraordinary drama is unfolding. An explosion at 7,300 meters aboard a Boeing 737 bound for the Hawaiian island of Oahu tears 35 square meters of fuselage from the airplane, exposing passengers to the sky. The cabin is depressurized. The explosion severs the emergency oxygen supply for the 90 passengers on board. Unless they rapidly reach a lower altitude where they can breathe again, they will die. Captain Bob Schornsteiner takes over command of the aircraft from First Officer Mimi Tompkins. He begins an emergency descent, dropping 1,200 meters per minute. Its speed now increasing to more than 500 kilometers an hour. As the aircraft hurtles down, passengers face a new terror. Wreckage blocks their view of the cockpit, and when the airplane split apart, the nose dropped down, roughly 1 meter out of alignment. The plane is held together by just the narrow floor beams.
The floor was buckling up, and you could tell the plane was bending in the middle.
Michelle Honda can't go forward far enough to see whether the pilots are alive or dead. She tries to make contact via the intercom. The wires are severed. As she struggles forward to try to reach the cockpit, she gets asked the one question she cannot answer.
Do we have a pilot?
I don't know.
Do we have a pilot?
I do not
The terror of those on board can only be imagined as she asks the one question no airplane passenger wants to hear.
Michelle Honda was coming up and cupping her hands and yelling in everyone's ear individually, "Can you fly a plane?" I was like, what? Get out of here. Is the pilot gone too? Because you couldn't tell if there was anybody up there.
It's 2 minutes since the explosion. First Officer Mimi Tompkins tries to alert air traffic control at Honolulu. Recordings from the cockpit voice recorder, the black box, analyzed later by accident investigators, provide a dramatic record of exactly what took place. The nearest place where they can try to land is the island of Maui. Kahului Airport is in a valley between two volcanic mountain ridges. Directly between them and safety lies a 3,000-meter-high mountain. To fly from the location of the explosion to the safety of Kahului Airport, the pilot needs to carefully maneuver, avoiding this high ground. Can the fragile aircraft survive the stresses of turning, or, if they ever reach the airport, of landing? And how can those on board survive? Jane Sato Tomita is barely conscious. Howard Kitaoka clutches her hand. The only faint sign of life is once, when Jane squeezes back.
I'm not exactly sure she was conscious, but I did manage to squeeze her hand, and she responded by squeezing my hand, and we just held hands. The simple squeeze of the hand at a time like that is very, very emotional.
Mimi Tompkins is not getting through to Honolulu air traffic control, so she switches to the frequency for the tower at Maui's Kahului Airport.
Aircraft calling tower, say again.
At 1:48, 3 minutes after the explosion, the crew make their first voice contact with the ground.
Aloha 243, say your position.
To the east of the airport. Sending out 11,000. Request clearance into Maui for landing. Request the emergency equipment.
Airport fire station, we have an Aloha 737 5 minutes out.
Approximately 20 miles. Cleared to runway 02. Decompression problem.
Pilot is declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Molitor. In the station.
Attention station. We have an in-flight emergency.
We have a 737, 5 minutes south, 20 miles, runway 2.
Both on board frequent void is unknown. It has achieved compression problems at this time.
Runway 2, runway 2.
Aloha 243. Okay, the equipment is on the field. It's on the way.
At 3,000 meters, flying west of the mountains, the pilot slows the aircraft and, as gently as possible, begins the right-hand turn towards Kahului. Passengers sense that someone must be in control of the aircraft.
I've had some training as a pilot, and we were wings level. It wasn't in a dive or roll. It was wings level. At that moment, I thought, we have a chance.
Meanwhile, those on the ground are unsure about what kind of crisis they're facing. It's a small airport. An airliner in trouble will test the fire crew's experience. For the air controller, it's hard to hear the airplane at all.
Just to verify again, you're breaking up. Your call sign is 243. Is that correct?
Aloha 243. Aloha 243.
Aloha 243.
Plan straight ahead for runway 02. I'll keep you advised of any wind change.
4 minutes after the explosion, at this lower altitude, they're able to remove their oxygen masks. With their speed having dropped to a little over 380 kilometers an hour, the wind noise decreases just enough for them to hear one another.
You want me to call for anything else?
No!
Aloha 243. Looks like we've lost the door. We have a hole in the left side of the aircraft.
But the tower can't hear this new information. They've lost contact with the aircraft. Their transmissions aren't being picked up.
Aloha 243, you still up?
The airplane's critical systems are beginning to fail.
Aloha 243.
As you can see,
The stricken Boeing 737 heads for the island of Maui.
Aloha 243.
Hearing nothing from the aircraft, the controller fears the worst.
Aloha 243.
Aloha 243, still up.
Aloha 243, if you still hear,
Please ident.
affirmative.
Aloha 243, roger. I got your ident straight away. Cleared to land, wind 0.
40. 20 knots.
Communication is restored, but the ordeal is far from over. During the descent, passengers experience moments of pure terror.
The plane kept vibrating and shaking, and the luggage racks were falling in, and there was electrical wires flying around zapping, and pretty much pandemonium, but it looked like the plane was ripping in half.
And suddenly, there's a new problem for the flight crew to handle.
Feel my manual reversion!
What?
The flight controls feel like manual reversion!
It feels to the pilot as though hydraulic systems, like power steering in an automobile, have now failed. The airframe is under great stress. They need to land as soon as possible.
Can we maintain altitude okay?
The crew fear that critical wiring and control cables may have been severed. Have any of the airplane's vital parts been damaged?
Let's try flying with the gear down!
Alright, you got it.
There are lights to indicate whether or not the landing gear has safely deployed. The main undercarriage has extended as normal. But the light showing that the nose wheel had extended doesn't come on.
The last thing the pilot wanted to see, especially with his airplane in the condition it was in, was that he didn't have a nose gear, because when the nose touched down on the runway, it would have broken the airplane apart, therefore breaking probably the fuel tanks apart, which could lead to a very dramatic fire and explosion.
A second attempt to extend the landing gear. The nose gear light is still out. But the radio link is so bad, the tower is still trying to assimilate the crisis.
Aloha 243.
Just to verify, you do need an ambulance, is that correct?
I still don't understand. Affirmative.
Roger, how many do you think are injured?
We have no idea. We can't communicate with flight attendants.
Okay, we'll have the ambulance on the way.
There's a possibility that we won't have a nose gear.
Now, Bob Schornsteimer has to make a critical decision. Should he wait for confirmation that the undercarriage is down, or land anyway?
The textbook in this case would tell the pilots to overfly the airfield so that the air traffic controllers can look at the landing gear and give them a report whether it's up or down. The pilots would then have to maneuver the airplane all the way around the airfield, come in for an approach, and land.
But with an airplane which might break apart at any moment, that is out of the question.
Tell them we've got problems! But we're gonna land anyway, even without a nose gear. So they should be aware that we don't have a nose gear indication down!
Aloha 243.
3. Wind now 050. The emergency equipment is in place.
Okay, be advised, we have no nose gear. We are landing with no nose gear.
With the airfield now in sight, Bob Schornsteimer has more critical decisions to make. He begins to slow the aircraft for landing.
Let's try flap 15!
An airplane's flaps are sliding panels at the back of the wings. To increase lift at low speeds, they need to be extended during takeoff and landing.
easier to control with the flaps up?
Yeah. Put it back to 5. Can you give me a V-speed for a flat 5 landing?
No two aircraft landings are the same. Pilots have to factor in many things: the wind speed and direction, passenger and fuel load, and the length of the runway before them.
You want the flaps right down as we land?
What?
You want the flaps right down as we land?
Yeah. But after we touch down.
Okay.
A complicated formula provides the VREF, indicating the safe landing speed. Even in a crisis like this, pilots have to reach for the manual. Extending the flaps fully will help act as a brake once they touch down. But to do it earlier could stress the airframe to breaking point.
What you have to remember is that the pilots weren't trained to handle a situation like this. With the top of their airplane missing, they became test pilots. The aerodynamic effects of the airplane were drastically different than they were used to. They really had to fly by the seat of their pants.
Aloha 243, wind now 050.
VREF 40 plus 30, flap 1 through flap 15.
Wait!
Using her flight manual, the first officer makes the complicated calculation that will give them their correct landing speed.
52!
Right!
The safe speed for landing, taking into account the length of Kahului's runway 2, is calculated to be 152 knots, 280 kilometers an hour. As the airplane slows, it becomes much harder to control, and so the pilot has to make another crucial call. Should he increase his speed to keep control, but possibly risk overshooting the runway? He gambles that the higher speed landing is the best option.
Our approach speed, I felt, was hot. I mean, we were coming in hot. I don't know, don't ask me how many miles an hour it was, because I don't know. But from other landings, we were coming in fairly hot.
Firefighters prepare for a worst-case scenario: a crash landing and fire. The lack of a nose gear would be a death sentence for everyone on board. 737, with 95 passengers and crew on board, has suffered an explosive decompression near the Hawaiian island of Maui. It's still airborne, but only just, with 35 square meters of fuselage missing from the Aloha plane. As they prepare for an emergency landing, warning lights indicate that the forward landing gear has not deployed. In the 10 horrifying minutes since the explosion, some passengers are convinced they're not going to make it alive.
I thought he was going to go in the water, and I was eaten by sharks. And then we saw the mountain, and I didn't think we were going to make it over it. I just knew we were going to crash into that mountain.
Suddenly, the news the pilots have been praying for.
The gear is down. Control command, the gear is down.
Okay, thanks. Aloha 243, just for your information, the gear appears down.
The gear appears down.
Want me to go to flap 40? Help it!
No! On the ground!
The crew have had to make life or death decisions. In the next few seconds, they'll find out whether they're the right ones. Michelle Honda cradles her injured colleague as the critical moment approaches. Passengers comfort one another in what may be their last moments alive. Though the forward undercarriage has extended, the crew still can't be certain whether it is locked in place or whether it will collapse on landing. If it doesn't hold firm, 40,000 kilos of airplane traveling at close to 320 kilometers an hour will smash nose down onto the tarmac.
Aloha 243, just
Understand where you are.
okay. Everything's fine. The gear did it. The fire trucks are on the way. Okay, shut it down.
Put it up.
In this extraordinary video, captured moments after landing, the amount of damage the airplane suffered is difficult to comprehend. An emergency evacuation of passengers who escaped injury has just been completed. Some injured passengers have still to be helped from the plane. How it flew for those 13 terrifying minutes seems astonishing. Captain Bob Schornsteimer is thanked by passengers who, just minutes before, had expected to die. The tension is released.
I just said, yes, baby. That's all I said. Pilot did a tremendous job.
Patricia Aubrey hugs her heroine, Michelle Honda.
I was crying, and of course everybody was traumatized, looking at the plane and looking at the people bleeding, and just, I kept touching myself, going, I'm here. I can't believe I'm still alive.
Her last-minute impulse to switch seats saves her from injury, maybe from death.
Something was telling me not to sit there, because I didn't have a good reason to move. You know, my guardian angel was tapping me on the shoulder and telling me to move.
A final, desperate head count by Michelle Honda confirms the crew's worst fears. C.B. Lansing, the veteran of 37 years flying for this airline, is missing. A sea search begins in the area of ocean where the explosion took place. Neither body nor wreckage are found. Jane Sato Tomita has regained consciousness. 7 passengers are seriously hurt, the worst injury, a skull fracture. But how have the rest survived? At the moment of decompression, it's just their seatbelts which make the difference between life and death.
It went poof, loud noise, and it just, the whole thing come apart. And I personally thought we were all gone. And we were fastened, all had our seatbelts fastened, while most of us evidently would have lost a lot more.
This is one of the most remarkable flying events in history. No airplane has ever landed with this amount of damage. The only thing that was holding the forward section cockpit to the rest of the fuselage were the floor beams. Basically, they were hanging by a thread.
From a close study of the fuselage, crash investigators tried to determine how the airplane structure remained in one piece. The critical factor proves to be the precise location of the explosion.
The thing that saved them was that because the damage was across the top of the airplane, as the nose tried to bend down, these members through here are in tension, and it kept them in line and kept them straight. So even though it was almost ready to break off, the structure was still strong enough here to keep it together. If this damage had been along the bottom, and the nose is trying to bend down this way, the structure would have been, this similar structure would have been in compression, and it would have buckled, and the nose would have certainly come off. So it was fortunate that the damage was across the top.
How does the roof of a jet airliner simply blow away? The U.S. National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, is tasked with discovering what happened. Investigators pull the airplane's records, something like an automobile service history, and suspicion falls right away on the airplane itself. The best evidence for what happened, the missing fuselage section, is now lying at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. But by carefully piecing together the clues they do have, investigators hope to solve one of the most spectacular accidents of all time. In the 37 years since its launch in 1968, more than 5,000 737s were sold. Somewhere in the world, a 737 takes off every 5 seconds. The accident airplane was number 152 off the production line, delivered in May 1969. The airplane was designed for a 20-year service life and 75,000 flights. This one had far exceeded that number. Its fuselage was under constant stress because of pressurization.
The fuselage of the airplane is actually breathing. It expands and contracts depending on altitude. When it's on the ground, it's in a contracted status. When it's at altitude, 24,000 feet, the fuselage expands, so the airplane is constantly cycling. That's pressurization. That will weaken the structure over a long period of time. And given the history of this airplane being a very high cycle airplane, that probably had something to do with weakening the structure of the fuselage.
With thousands of 737s taking to the skies each day, investigators need to be certain what made this one burst apart. Airlines Boeing 737 bursts apart in midair over Hawaii. After 13 extraordinary minutes in the air, it makes an emergency landing on the island of Maui. Investigators need to discover what caused this spectacular incident. In Washington, D.C., Jim Wildy is one of the NTSB team who worked the case. His expertise as a metallurgist proves crucial.
I got a call about 2 in the morning, middle of the night, from my boss, and there had been an accident in Hawaii. They were putting the team together, and I hopped on a plane and went to Hawaii.
He takes samples from the remaining fuselage, and back in the lab, discovers something barely visible to the naked eye. Hairline cracks like this, beside the holes where rivets had been. Figuring out how those cracks came to be there means going back to basics, to the way the Boeing 737 was put together. Airplanes are built from many separate panels. Where they overlap, they're bonded together by a powerful adhesive, known as epoxy. Rivets hold the panels tight together, while the epoxy sets hard. On the Aloha airplane, there's telltale discoloration inside the overlapping joints. Here's the vital clue.
You can see now where the dark material is the epoxy that was used to bond the two layers of the lap joint together. The white material you see here is corrosion damage of the aluminum fuselage skin. So the original intent was the stress that's trying to pull one skin away from the other skin piece, the stresses would go through the bonding and not through the rivets. Of course, as this thing becomes disbonded, now the rivets themselves are loaded, and especially this top row of rivets, and this is the row of rivets we think that had the fatigue cracking in it that led to the eventual opening of the roof structure on the Aloha 737 airplane.
The files reveal that Boeing warned airlines, including Aloha, of problems with some early 737s. If the epoxy isn't applied at exactly the right temperature, if the panels have moisture or dirt on them, the bonding can fail. In written warnings, service bulletins, issued over 15 years before Flight 243, they recommend regular detailed inspections. The Hawaii climate, with humid and salt-laden air, helps corrosion to occur. But instead of grounding airplanes for a nose-to-tail examination, Aloha has inspectors make occasional checks, often at night, when those on duty are least alert. Working in difficult conditions, under artificial light, those tiny cracks escape detection.
These cracks go unrepaired, and now you have an airplane that is a ticking time bomb.
There are other problems. Boeing service bulletins and what are called airworthiness directives issued by the Federal Aviation Administration are often difficult to understand.
Airworthiness directives are very complex and read like a legal document. Aloha needed to have someone who could read that document and interpret it into plain English for the mechanics, the wrench turners. That never happened.
Investigators now believe they know why the airplane burst open, but they don't yet know how.
I was flying back from Hawaii to Los Angeles, and while I was in the air, I got a message that we needed to interview this passenger who had apparently seen a crack as she was getting on the accident flight.
You saw something as you got on this airplane. What did you see?
What I saw was to the right of the door where the paint was white. Well, it was a crack. It was like, not a hole exactly, but the metal on top had come away from the metal below. I was going to tell the flight attendant, but they were busy and we had to take our seats.
Oh yeah, you figured, they know what they're doing, it's their airplane.
I didn't want to make a fuss or anything.
No, absolutely.
The witness saw cracking in this area, and we found fatigue cracking back in here. So this is the line where fatigue cracking joined up. One piece came down this way and folded off, and the other piece went across the top and came off to the right side.
But something still doesn't make sense. Boeing designed the 737 and other of its aircraft so that this should never happen. Every 10 inches along the airplane are what's called tear strips, attached to the inside of the fuselage to strengthen it. If a crack develops, it should only run as far as the next tear strip before shooting off at a 90-degree angle. Though a hole has appeared in the aircraft, it acts like a safety valve.
The purpose of the tear strip is to confine any kind of rip or tear in the fuselage skin to a 10-inch square, basically. If you allow it to propagate beyond this 10-inch square, you could then compromise larger sections of the fuselage and cause a blowout. The 10-inch square allows a controlled decompression and confines any structural damage to a very small area.
So why has the safety valve failed here? The NTSB believed there were so many cracks in the fuselage that they simply joined together, running right through the tear strips. But is that the final answer on what happened to Flight 243? A new theory claims to shed fresh light on those dramatic events. Matt Austin is an engineer who lives in Honolulu. The story of Flight 243 both appalls and fascinates him.
I flew very regularly on Aloha Airlines, and I'd been on that plane about a week before it actually lost the roof. You could tell that something was loose in the airplane. It's just like when you're in an old car and you hit a bump, you can hear the rattles in it.
He begins his own investigation, scrutinizing the 4,000 pages of evidence and photographs gathered during the official inquiry.
I am an expert in explosion dynamics and how pressure vessels explode, what causes them to explode, which way the cracks run as they're coming apart. In the case of the Aloha accident, the main focus from the aeronautical industry was they were looking at it as an airplane structural failure, whereas I analyzed it from the point of view of a pressure vessel failure.
As he reviews the evidence, one question keeps recurring. Why is C.B. Lansing sucked out of the aircraft and not her colleague, Jane Sato Tomita? Jane was further forward than C.B. at the crucial moment. Jane was at row 2. C.B. was at row 5. The NTSB believed the roof separation began near row 3. Passenger testimony, gathered shortly after the incident, suggests that C.B. Lansing was sucked upwards and to the left, but not forward.
I was on the aisle, on the right. So I look up from my magazine, I see a pair of legs go up and out on the left, just back of first class. From where I was, if the nose was 12, this is at 11. Yeah?
Forensic evidence raises further intriguing questions. Michael Sweet is a trained detective, now a specialist in blood splatter analysis. He examines official photographs of the 737 fuselage.
This is a large photograph of the left side of the airplane. The front would be in this location. There's what we suspect to be a bloodstain pattern on the right beside the window, right here.
Could this bloodstain be where C.B. Lansing's head impacted with the outside of the fuselage? The analyst believes so.
Well, the fact that there are bloodstains on the side of this airplane suggests to me that the blood source in this case was momentarily trapped when it came into contact with the side of the airplane. If the flight attendant in this case was ejected outside of a gaping hole, I would expect her to disappear almost immediately and not leave any bloodstains on the side of the airplane.
This analysis suggests only that she was trapped, but without explaining how or why. Matt Austin believes he has the answer. 1988, a Boeing 737 owned by Aloha Airlines in Hawaii suffers an explosive decompression in midair. Amazingly, it lands safely, with the loss of one crew member. Investigators blame metal fatigue due to poor maintenance, but a new and controversial theory has emerged, challenging at least part of the chain of events. What if a 10-inch square safety hole has opened up as it was designed to do, but directly above the flight attendant? Matt Austin believes C.B. Lansing is sucked into the hole, momentarily blocking it.
All of the air that's trying to escape has no place to go, so it built up a huge pressure spike, and that's what blew the roof off the top of the airplane.
What he's describing is known as a fluid hammer. In scientific terms, air is fluid, as is water. Here's a simple demonstration in a bathtub.
The water is in fact escaping through the drain. As we move the drain plug back down toward the hole, it will immediately slam shut and create a force, which is a simple example of a fluid hammer.
He believes this phenomenon, on a giant scale, caused the accident.
It's very tragic, but if we don't look at the forensic evidence that's left, then we won't understand exactly what caused the explosive decompression and possibly prevent a future occurrence.
The NTSB say the fluid hammer theory is valid scientifically, but for them the evidence still points to something simpler. A virtually simultaneous failure in the airplane's many weak spots.
The safety board's investigations are never really closed. We always would take into account any new information that comes out. I believe in the case of the Aloha accident, we have not changed our probable cause, and we still are sticking with the probable cause as we determined back in 1988.
Since the crucial physical evidence was never found, what happened on board at the precise moment of explosion will probably never be known. Aloha Airlines management took most of the blame for their poor maintenance regime. The NTSB demanded that the Federal Aviation Administration do a much better job enforcing maintenance standards. Boeing had already improved their manufacturing process to prevent the adhesive becoming so easily contaminated. What happened on Flight 243 made flying safer. Soon after, Congress passed the Aviation Safety Research Act.
This accident had a very profound effect on the aviation industry and the way we look at aging airplanes, old aircraft. We changed the way we monitor how they age, the way we inspect them, and of course now how we manufacture them. We use different processes. This was a very critical accident for aviation history.
Those 13 terrifying minutes left their impact on the survivors of Flight 243.
I had to go through a healing process. I took fear flying classes, and the old saying of you fall off a horse and you get back on it is very accurate, but it's a lot tougher to actually do it.
Patricia Aubrey had to find a way of dealing with the memories also. Her way was to revisit the same piece of airspace where the terror unfolded.
I would go flying with my psychologist. You go through what they call desensitization, where you confront your fear and you just do it so many times that you can do it without having a bad reaction. Before that happened, if something bad happened to me, I hate life. But I don't hate life. I can deal with it. Bring it on. I'll take care of it. I'd much rather be alive.
There's one further legacy of that fateful day. The ocean never did surrender the body of C.B. Lansing. Instead, a memorial garden honoring the veteran flight attendant was planted at Honolulu Airport, beneath the big Hawaiian sky, where she spent the better part of her life, and where it was so suddenly ended.